Hey team, Yasin here, and in this training we're going to be going over coaching call number 8, hunger and fullness scale, all of these step-by-step instructions for how to be able to do this properly so that way you can make sure that you go ahead and get the practice in, specifically for practice coaching call number 8. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Of course, as always, we are continuing our theme of putting your transformation program together inside of this module. Of course, we do also have the training outline available for you. And of course, just a quick note, I know we are going to go ahead and go into the couple introductions that we do go through on every single coaching call. I do want to go ahead and mention to you that we do typically change some subtle changes around with the introduction. So make sure you go ahead and don't skip them. If you do need to go through them, you can do so at 1.5 or 2x speed. So let's go ahead and talk about those couple introductions, right? So of course, I do want to go ahead and mention the pre-call ritual. We have gone ahead and started talking about this again. Now that you are starting to get a gist of how the practice coaching calls are going to go, it is going to be very important for you to make sure that you are starting to implement a pre-call ritual. So that way you can make sure that you are doing the same thing every single time right before the call. So that way you can actually prepare your mind, make sure that your mind is not all over the place, and make sure that you can really treat that time. Typically for me, I do about 30 minutes, 15 minutes, depending on how long the next call is going to go. Really treat that time as sacred. So that way you can make sure that you are showing up as your best self, especially when you are showing up for someone else who might be a partner, who might be a student, especially when you're showing up to those meetings. It's very important to make sure that your mind is in the right place. Of course, inside of the explanation guide, we've gone ahead and included for you some practical preparation, some right before prep, as well as when starting the call as well. But again, remember, you want to make sure that you are customizing this. You can have maybe a post-it note next to you. You can go ahead and have something on your phone. Doesn't matter how you do it, but you want to make sure that you start putting something together for you so that way you are prepared before the call. Of course, this is what is going to allow you to be able to make sure that you are getting into observer mode and that you are not riding the roller coaster of thoughts and emotions, whether that be your own roller coaster of thoughts and emotions, or really even being able to ride the roller coaster of thoughts and emotions of your student or the person that you are listening to. You want to make sure that you are in observer mode, and being in that pre-call ritual and doing that pre-call ritual is going to provide that for you. Okay, so that is the first note that we want to go ahead and talk about, is about the pre-call ritual. Of course, we do every single time talk about organization equals organization. Make sure that you are keeping track of the notes for your student, so that way you do have that reference, you do have that guide of this entire journey that you are taking the student through, and you're facilitating. All of that is documented, and you're bringing those thoughts into reality. Okay, so that's going to be a very important note there. And then of course, your training practice modules. Remember, all of the scripts and the templates that we are providing for you inside of this module is for one purpose and one purpose only. That is to help facilitate you finding your own voice. So make sure you understand that these principles that we talk about when we talk about the invitation and the self-sabotage and the arc, yes, they are here, but do not get married too closely to these topics. And really kind of the structure here, we'll walk through it at the end of the module and how kind of this reorganizes itself. But really you want to understand that this is the done for you, do it yourself approach. So that way you can actually get the practice in, and then you can start to customize everything once you actually understand the intake form and the first coaching call and all of that kind of stuff. Because ultimately the goal of an amazing transformation program is to be able to meet the student where they are at. And so that way you do have that tool belt to be able to mix and match. So make sure that you do go ahead and commit to the process, because remember, even though you may not be ready right now, through the process, you will become ready. And so this is the process of really putting in the practice in there. From there, we go ahead and move on into coaching call number 8, the overview of coaching call number 8. So practice coaching call number 8 is going to be where you will be practicing speaking to your practice student about how much to eat, and specifically the level of hunger and fullness scale. So if you remember, inside of the training that was titled How Much to Eat in a previous module, we did talk about the 5 levels of how much to eat, right? The 5 levels of energy, measuring, and tracking, right? And so the reason why we're going to be starting off on level 1, which is the hunger and fullness scale, is because what you're going to find is that most students do not have any familiarity with any of the levels of tracking. And so starting off with just hunger and fullness scale is going to be valuable for many students. Now, obviously, I do want to go ahead and put out a note here, is that obviously for advanced students, there is a lot of room here to tweak this and introduce higher levels of measuring and tracking. And so for the purposes of coaching call number 8 and the practice of coaching call number 8, today, we are talking about hunger and fullness scale, but I do want you to go ahead and have in the back of your mind that for more advanced students, there's a lot of room to be able to go ahead and tweak here and go ahead and have them do some of the higher levels of tracking as well. Now, if you do need more details and explanation, make sure that you do go ahead and refer to that previous training that we had in an earlier module, so that way you can go ahead and refresh yourself if you do need that. And so you are now starting to understand that, hey, this entire certification program that you have been going through has not been random. It really has been by design. And so that's why earlier in previous modules, we talked about, hey, this is all of the information that you need to know for references purposes, right? We talked about, hey, this is for reference. Don't worry, you don't got to memorize this, right? This is what it is that we were talking about, is that you will be able to go back to those previous trainings. You have that entire tool belt, you have that entire toolbox in earlier modules, so that way you can go through it multiple times and refresh yourself on those topics if you so needed to do so, okay? And so that is what we are talking about when we talk about practice coaching call number 8 and the overview for practice coaching call number 8. Okay, now I do want to go ahead and emphasize here, is this going to be the final wording? Is this going to be the final way that coaching call number 8 is going to be structured? No. Remember, I've said this a gazillion and 2 times, but I want to go ahead and emphasize it again. The purpose of module 5 is to help facilitate you finding your voice, right? And so what's going to happen is that you're going to have this entire bank, this entire toolbox, and you're going to be able to go ahead and practice and figure out, okay, you know what? This works for me. This doesn't work for me. This is what I got to tweak. This is what I like. This is what I didn't like, right? This is what you're gonna have to move around, right? And so that's what we're doing, is we're facilitating your ability to be able to practice this and really accelerating that process of you finding your voice, being able to find your coaching style, being able to really get into that. And that is ultimately the purpose of what it is that we are doing here, okay? Now, along the way, you are going to make sure that you are utilizing the coaching skills that you have learned as well already, okay? And then in regards to coaching call number 8, there is going to be a new student action notes document. Remember, this is something that your students are going to fill out with you on the coaching call. And so this document that you are going to have in the resources section below is going to be something that is specific to the practice coaching call number 8. Now, obviously you do have these as references, but that's where you do have the flexibility in upcoming trainings and upcoming modules and really in your own transformation product. Now that you understand, okay, these are the templates, how can I go ahead and customize this? Because maybe you decide, you know what, I want to go ahead and talk about a different level. Well, we can guide you on how to actually create your own action notes as well. But for the purposes of the practice, we do go ahead and provide you those templates so that way you can get rocking and rolling, okay? And then of course from there, we also do go ahead and talk to you about how to send this 1 to 2 days before your coaching call in module 6. And then there is also the coaching call guide that is going to go along with coaching call number 8. Now remember, we have gone ahead and started putting this into slides format for you as well. And so if you would like to go ahead and share your screen and have the Google document there, you can go ahead and do that. If you want to go ahead and have the slides, you can go ahead and do that as well. Just remember that you will need to make sure that you are taking time to go through these reference materials and really go ahead and make it your own, right? If you find that your preference and you like it to be able to explain these topics maybe in slides format a little bit better, you like to add a couple words on the slides, maybe something that cues you to be able to remember what, right? And so all of these are just references. And so you are going to be able to tweak and customize this according to your own style of how you would like to present the information, right? So we're making it as easy as possible for you by providing you all of the reference material, but make sure that you do go through it. Make sure you go ahead and make it a part of your own, right? Make it friendly to your own teaching and coaching style. And then ultimately we will walk you through how to be able to rebrand this once we get to module 6, as long as you have the student licensing agreement in place. Okay, so that is the quick overview of coaching call number 8. Let's go ahead and hop into the explanation of it. Of course, you want to make sure that you are using the zoom in and zoom out feature, so that way you can go ahead and make sure you don't get lost in the ocean of words here. And then of course, remember, these are just the scripts that we are providing for you as kind of just the tools and the ammunition. I'm not going to go through everything word for word, but it is your responsibility to make sure that you do go through everything word for word, so that way you can make sure that you are prepared for your practice call. Okay, so jumping into here, of course, rapport, we already know that that section is going to be custom based off of the student and who you are talking to. From there, we go ahead and continue our ritual of what's going well. Remember, we've gone ahead and provided for you some example prompts, but of course you are going to be coming up with your own as you go through this journey as well. And remember, hey, if you figure something out and you find out something that is a really awesome question that you're like, you know what, this has been working really well for me, go ahead and reach out to us as coaches, drop it inside of the student community, go ahead and share it with the rest of the Remote Wellness Academy family as well. Okay, so that is what's going well. Make sure you go ahead and reaffirm that with energy also. And then you go ahead and get into part number 2, which is coaching around challenges and obstacles. This is where you go ahead and get into the nitty gritty of the action steps from the previous coaching call and really walk the student through, hey, what went well, what didn't go so well, and really walking them through that, right? And then in terms of affirming what was different if they did not have obstacles. Now, of course, we do have a couple example coaching sequences here for you. And so nothing has changed here. But remember, you do want to go ahead and tweak and customize this as you are doing your practice coaching calls with your partner. So that way you can get adequate preparation for this, right? So if you're being the partner, if you're being the student, make sure that you are putting up some difficulty. Make sure that you are actually going up and saying, hey, you know what, I did have difficulty. So that way your partner, who's the RWP, the remote wellness practitioner, they can go ahead and have some practice coaching you through some difficulties that you might be theoretically having, right? So make sure that you do go ahead and do that. Pick one of the coaching sequences, customize them, build your own, whatever it might be. At the end of this module, we'll go ahead and put everything together for you. So that way you have an entire bank. And then ultimately, like I said, with the previous part as well, you are going to be going ahead and adding your own questions on there. And then if you do find something that is really working for you, if you find, hey, this has been something that I ask and a student responds very well to it, then you can go ahead and let us know as coaches, let us know in the family, let us know in the student community, so that way we can make sure that we are sharing it with everyone. Okay, so that is that part there. And then we go ahead and get into part number 3, which is all about the new information. Okay, now this new information, specifically in practice coaching call number 8, is going to be about hunger and fullness. Of course, as always, there is that important note about dialogue that is there. We are going to go ahead and get permission from the student, and then we're going to go ahead and introduce the topic. Now, I'm going to go ahead and mention this to you is that remember, hunger and fullness is one of the levels of measuring and tracking that we talked about in a previous training. And so if you do need to make sure that you are going deeper on it with the student, right? If you want to go ahead and kind of reference that, you can go ahead and do so. And then there is a lot of adjustment that can happen here in terms of matching the experience of the student, right? If you find from your conversation with your student that your student is somebody that has been tracking macros and has been doing app tracking for a very long time, then it is going to be challenging if you go ahead and have them start at level 1, right? They're not going to be very happy about that. And so there is some customization that can happen here, right? But for the sake of practice, let's go ahead and talk about the hunger and fullness scale, right? So today we're going to be talking about something called hunger and fullness scale. Pretty cool, right, Tina? Of course, I'm kind of just starting off with some jokes here, but you get the point here, right? You're kind of having that dialogue back and forth. So in a previous coaching call, we talked about what foods to eat, which foods give you energy, and which foods take away energy. But as you already noticed, when we talked about how to eat and conscious eating, we're all about a holistic, sustainable approach to health and nutrition. Why? Because it doesn't matter in the long run if you got healthy for 6 months and then fell off, right? In 10 years from now, what's going to matter is if you were able to actually sustain it. Does that make sense? Yes. And so what foods you eat is only a part of the picture that we are talking about, because the other part of the picture is the portion size. It's how much we eat, right? In other words, do we eat too little or do we eat too much for our body's energy needs, right? And so there are many levels to this whole food portions. In fact, we actually designed an entire system that has 5 levels of food measuring. But today, Tina, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the hunger and fullness scale level of understanding how much energy your body actually needs. And then in the future, when we actually go ahead and ascend to some of those other levels, I can go ahead and walk you through some of the more advanced levels of food measuring as well. Now, I'm going to go ahead and break frame here for you guys as RWA students. You're going to see that I went ahead and kind of teased that there are other levels of tracking that are here, and measuring and tracking, right? Now, I didn't talk about them, but I did go ahead and tease that, so that way the student has that open loop, that open door in their mind. And I'm going ahead and showing that, hey, we have gone ahead and put together an entire curriculum for this, right? There's other tools in the toolbox. There's more to this than just this. And so that way the student knows, okay, hey, my RWP has prepared a lot for me. So that way they sense and see the value that is there as well. Now, obviously, this is going to be where you have a lot of confidence because you've gone through the in-depth training. You know what it is that we are talking about right here, right? You went through an entire massive training on this. And so again, I've said this many times before, is that your imposter syndrome is going to be decimated as you are going through this process is because you realize, wow, I really am an enthusiast about all of it, what it is that I'm talking about. I'm not necessarily trying to show myself as the expert, as the guru on the mountain, that I have a PhD in any of this, but I am 10 steps ahead of my student. And so it allows me to have confidence because there's so much value that I can provide, because along with me having gone through the training, I'm really helping the student be able to implement each of these pieces. And so yes, I know what the 10 pieces are going to be ahead. I know what the 10 steps are going to be ahead, but it really is just a matter of focusing on piece by piece by piece. Sometimes, especially some students, when we get some students in the RWA program and they come in from maybe a fitness or a health certification background, right? They came in and they're like, they like to geek out on all of the health stuff, and they like to geek out on kind of like the body types and the microbialisms and, the metabolisms and all that kind of stuff. When the truth is that most students, most clients, most people in general need help with the basics and actually implementing the basics. And so even though there are those who like to geek out on the science side of things, that is not at all necessary in order to actually help somebody have that transformation in their life. Okay, so this is kind of just the introduction to the topic. And then we go ahead and start defining hunger and fullness scale, right? So we say, hey, so what is hunger and fullness scale? Hunger and fullness scale is about recognizing, becoming conscious of what happens inside of our body before we actually get hungry, right? So instead of waiting until we're hungry and then eating like we haven't eaten in weeks, instead we get in tune with our internal signals within our body. And so it's kind of like learning to listen to when our body is speaking to us, right? Learning the language of the body. And unfortunately, in society, we're taught to ignore or sometimes even override this natural communication. And so we sometimes forget this natural language, right? And so we want to keep in mind though, Tina, that this is just one approach to measuring how much energy we need for our body, right? Earlier I said we've designed an entire system, right? We have an entire system that has 5 levels of this, right? And so we like to start off at this level of hunger and fullness scale because it really is a holistic approach, right? Instead of jumping directly to maybe counting calories or stuff like that, right? We want to go ahead and talk about this approach because it definitely is something that once we have it in our repertoire, once we have it in our toolbox, it's something that we can follow for the rest of our life versus some of the other more advanced levels of tracking. Maybe it's not as sustainable as this one might be, right? So like I said, we've already designed 5 levels of food tracking and measuring, right? It's already a part of the curriculum, right? But rather than jumping to those advanced levels and overwhelming many students, we like to go ahead and start off easy and then build from there, right? So down the road, we can always learn some of those more advanced skills if we actually need to. But right now we are going to be going ahead and starting with the hunger and fullness scale. Does that make sense, Tina? Yes, that makes sense. Awesome. Cool. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about the details of what exactly the hunger and fullness scale is and how it actually works, right? So you can kind of imagine it's like the gas tank in your car, right? Is that before you actually start running out of gas, there's that buffer zone before you actually run out of gas, right? And so that gas light turns on, and then depending on the car that you have, there might be like 20 or 30 miles before you actually run out of gas, right? And so what we do is we don't want to wait until we have completely run out of gas before we eat, right? We want to make sure that we're actually understanding the gas light. When does that gas light turn on for our stomach, right? And so why do you think we wouldn't want to wait until we completely run out of gas before we decide to eat? And then you go ahead and let the student kind of guess there. Exactly, right? Because as soon as the gas tank runs completely empty, what happens is that complete craziness unleashes, right? Some people get completely lazy, they're unable to move, while others people get completely crazy and they get completely unreasonable, right? And so we call this sometimes going into hangry mode, right? Hungry and angry, hangry, right? And then what happens? You probably eat things that you shouldn't eat because you're desperate, because you want to eat whatever's in reach, right? You're unable to think clearly. And so if you let yourself get too hungry, it's almost like it's impossible to make clear, good decisions. We get to the point where it's like we need to eat something that we will literally eat anything. Like we'll eat like 5 pieces of toast, candy bars, whole pints of ice cream, raw food, peanut butter with a spoon, like literally anything that is within reach, right? Does it sound familiar? Maybe something that maybe you've done it yourself. Maybe you know somebody who does this as well, right? And the crazy thing is that even after you eat that, right, you sometimes still might not be satisfied because it really wasn't a real meal. And so the body is still searching for that meal and it's still craving even more food, right? Have you ever had experience with this, Tina, right? Does this sound familiar? Has this ever happened to you? You're going ahead and getting that dialogue there, right? And so the very first step, right? What do we got to notice about this? The very first step of all of this, Tina, is you got to know the difference between emotional hunger and physical hunger. This is something that a lot of people are not familiar with, okay? okay? Emotional hunger is when we're eating out of habit, when we're eating out of a feeling, when we're eating out of stress, when we're eating out of coping, when we're eating out of boredom, right? And a lot of people confuse that with actual physical hunger, because physical hunger is more of a sensation. It's a light growl in the stomach, right? It's feeling that lack of fuel, right? And unfortunately, most people don't know the difference between when they're emotional eating and when they're actually eating, right? Do you know anybody like that? Yes. Okay, cool. Now, why do you think people emotionally eat, Tina? So you see, you can go ahead and have some dialogue here. And the reason why is because in the same way that people take alcohol or drugs when they're stressed out or having difficulty in life, is that food is a coping tool, because food, I don't know if you know this, but food actually changes our brain chemistry in the same way that drugs do, okay? It releases all sorts of neurochemicals in the same way that drugs or alcohol and those kinds of things do. And so the very first step in order for us to be able to actually start building that relationship with the hunger and fullness scale is to be able to start noticing the differences in our own bodies, right? Being able to notice the difference in your body, because everybody's signals are going to be unique, right? It's going to be a different type of feeling. And so it's not just, hey, let's give you a standard template and this is what it's going to look like, right? You have to start to notice in our own body, what does the actual physical hunger feel like? What does the emotional hunger feel like? And being able to get intimate with that, really being able to understand the difference between that, okay? So let's go ahead and talk about how you notice hunger specifically for you, Tina, okay? What lets you know that you will soon be hungry, right? What are some of the signs that you notice there? Now, over here, what we're doing is we're going ahead and adding a little bit of kind of dialogue, right? We're bringing it home. But the big thing here is that we are going to be using the answers that they provide later on for the experience exercise. And so you might need to go ahead and use some curious exploration, right? The coaching skill that you learned to be able to kind of explore with the student, right? And so if the student has difficulty putting that into words, you can kind of go ahead and ask them questions like, hey, imagine for a moment that you and I switched bodies and I had to replace being you for a day, right? If I was in your body, how would you teach me to feed you? What are some of the things that you would feel, right? What are the cues internally? What are the thoughts that you might be thinking? What are the things that you might be smelling, right? What emotions are you feeling? You can kind of just ask the student some of these questions, and then you're kind of taking note of that and really helping the student kind of navigate the feelings and the emotions and the thoughts and all of those things that happen when they are starting to actually get hungry, okay? So make sure you are taking note of that, because you are going to need those notes here in just a second, okay? Then, right after we've gone ahead and done that dialogue, what we do is we go ahead and pull the student over to the bigger picture. Now, the frame that is very helpful here is more about the mission frame, about why do I have to learn this, right? It's unnatural. And so what you go ahead and do is you talk to the student and say, cool, now that some of this is starting to get clear, right? Some students at this point start to say, yeah, but if this is so important to learn, right? How come, I've been 25, 35, 45, 65 years, 40, 55 years old. How come I've never learned this before, right? How come this wasn't something that was taught in school? How come no one ever talks about this a lot? And the reason, Tina, for that is because the world today is completely unprepared for what is happening right now. You might be wondering what's happening right now. That what's happening right now is there's a massive shift in what's happening in the world, and most people are completely unaware of it. Because if you think about it, in the last 50 years, the world has changed more than it has in the last 200,000 years. In fact, before the 1950s, life for the most part was the same for most of human history, right? Our brains were built for a time of being able to survive in those times, right? Our brains and bodies weren't built to be able to thrive in the modern times. And so yes, learning skills like the one that we're talking about, hunger and fullness scale, learning some of the skills about the sleep, some of the things that we've talked about in the past, yes, it is unnatural for us as humans. But do you know what else is unnatural? For 99% of human history, they also didn't have air conditioning, cars, refrigerators, super stimuli foods with a bunch of carbs and sugar, a global supply chain that allowed pretty much anyone in an industrialized country to have unlimited food, and so much more. And so the conditions that we're living in today are also unnatural. So do you think that if we're living in times that no human beings have ever lived in before, that we're going to have to learn skills that no other human beings have had to learn before? Probably, right? And so here's the truth, Tina. For the first time in human history, people are dying from eating too much. For the first time in human history, your food is more dangerous than gunpowder. Think about that for a second, right? Did you know that heart disease is the number one killer in the world? 17.9 million people die every year from heart disease. And so if you had to guess, Tina, what percentage of those 17.9 million people could be saved every single year if it wasn't for food and diet and lifestyle change, right? If you had to guess, Let the student guess. 90%. The answer is 90%, meaning out of the 17.9 million people that die every single year, 16 million of those could be saved every single year from simple diet and lifestyle change. Let that sink in for a second. In fact, did you know that simple diet and lifestyle change can prevent 93% of diabetes, 81% of heart attacks, 50% of strokes, 36% of all cancers? Now, real quick, I'm going to go ahead and break frame here so I can talk to you guys as RWA students, is that this entire kind of the data around this, if it kind of feels like you're vomiting on the student a little bit too much, you're lecturing at them a little bit too much, you can actually go ahead and include this inside of your guide, inside of the slides that you are going to be presenting, right? And so this is where, when I talked about earlier, when you're kind of finessing based off of your own style, based off of how you're doing this, if it feels like you're lecturing at the student for too much, you kind of feel like, hey, you're kind of just a talking head that's going on for too long, you can kind of start to add visuals. You can go ahead and add some text into your slides to be able to kind of be like, hey, if you had to guess, and then you kind of have like, what percentage, and then you just have like a percentage symbol inside of your slides, and then that way it kind of becomes more interactive. We're going to leave that up to you, right? We're providing the foundation, the infrastructure, but based off of your own coaching style, based off of your own voice, I would urge you to start tweaking and start customizing even the slides and the visuals that you're having your student go through. Now, obviously, we're providing for you, we're kind of getting you 80% of the way there, right? We're providing for you a good gist of that. We're kind of giving you the bulk of what it is that you need. But over time, as you start to customize this, you're going to start to be able to find out your own style. And eventually, you're going to be able to create some amazing guides and some amazing presentations as well, just the way that you've been seeing inside of the Remote Wellness Academy thus far, right? We didn't get to the point of making these amazing trainings the way that we do because all of a sudden we were born this way. It came from practice, and it came from putting these together for students in the one-on-one environment, and we started being really able to craft our voice and kind of crafting our presentation style, and that's what you can go ahead and do from this as well. And so if we get back into the script over here, you'll see that we go ahead and start over here. So this is a completely new world that unfortunately school and society has not prepared anyone for, right? And so this is our mission here at, right, insert remote wellness practice name here, is that we want to get these foundational skills to as many people as possible. Our mission is to save the lives of 1,000 people, because we know that if we help 1,000 students, just like you, Tina, you will be able to go out there and transfer these skills to your friends and family, right? When you get amazing results and actually transform your identity and learn these skills, you can start helping others do that as well. And imagine if you in your life just took these foundational skills and you helped just 3 friends and family, right? People talk about generational wealth, but what about generational ignorance, right? There are entire families that have been broken apart due to death of poor health that could have been saved with these knowledge, education, tools, and skills, okay? And so few places are teaching these skills in the simple, understandable way that you are learning right now, the way that we've designed it here at insert remote wellness practice name here. And so that is why we are so passionate about what it is that we do, right? This is why it's so important to understand what it is that we are talking about inside of this program. Is this making sense, Tina? Let the student respond. Awesome. So talk to me. Where's your headspace right now? What are you thinking about this, right? Where are your thoughts after what it is that we just spoke about? And so like I said earlier, this is going to be how you can kind of link what it is that we are talking about. So that way, all of these tools, all of these things that we're learning, right? It doesn't feel like just a gimmick, right? It doesn't just go ahead and have them forget about it. It's not like, oh, this is just a random thing I learned about hunger and fullness scale. You went ahead and connected this to the bigger picture, and you said, hey, this is a thing. This is not just something that we just went ahead and just came up with and it's irrelevant. No, these are foundational skills that every human being on the planet needs to learn. And that is exactly what it is that you are learning inside of this program, Tina. Is this making sense? Yes, it's making sense. Awesome. And so this is what we're talking about when we go ahead and pull it back to the bigger picture. So that way they can say, okay, hey, yes, what it is that I'm learning right now is unnatural for us as human beings. And that's because we are having to learn skills that we never had to learn before. In fact, for the vast majority of human history, they had to learn other types of skills. They had to learn how to be able to maybe fight. They had to learn how to be able to fight in the, battle. They had to learn how to be able to cook and clean in certain ways, right? All of that was because those were the skills that were necessary in that time frame. And guess what? That time frame spanned the vast majority of human history. And so now that we're living in a different time, we're going to have to learn these different skills so that way we can not just survive, we can actually thrive in the new modern world, right? So I'm not going to go through that entire thing again, but you kind of get the gist of it, and you can kind of go ahead and start implementing a lot of your own philosophies and your own understandings of this content, and really put your mission for your remote wellness practice here as well, and really start to connect your students to all of this. So with that being said, from this entire section, that is the new information part of practice coaching call number 8. Of course, I'm going to go ahead and put out a note here. Of course, what it is that you learned was in so much more in depth, but of course, this is up to you where if you decided that you did want to go ahead and go more in depth with your student, but remember, you want to make it as actionable as possible. And there is a lot more that you can learn from this. Okay. From there, we go ahead and hop into the next part of practice coaching call number 8, which is the actual experience exercise. Inside of this exercise, we are going to go ahead and walk the student through creating their own hunger and fullness scale. And so we go ahead and introduce the experience exercise. So, okay, cool. Next, we're going to go ahead and walk through creating your own inner hunger and fullness scale. Okay. So the standard hunger and fullness scale that we've made for our students looks like this. And then you go ahead and share your screen. You go ahead and walk them through this. So you see, this is the standard hunger and fullness scale. You're going to see a copy of this on your student action notes as well. And so this is where we go ahead and talk about, okay, you know what? 3 is when the gas light starts coming on. 10 is basically when we've gone completely limbic hangry. And then 8 is when we are satisfied, right? Now, I'm not going to go ahead and walk through this script right here. You can go ahead and ad-lib this, or you can go ahead and go off of the script entirely, completely up to you. But you're just going to go ahead and walking the student through kind of the template standard that does exist there, right? And then you go ahead and talk about introducing the custom hunger and fullness scale, right? So you go, okay, cool. Looks pretty simple, right? But here's the problem. If it was that easy, then none of us would overeat and none of us would wait until we're starving in order to eat. And so unfortunately, most of us have the habit of eating beyond fullness, right? Sometimes there's so much awesome food that's sitting in front of you. It tastes so good. And then all of a sudden in the middle of the conversation, before we know it, we went ahead and ate so much that we wish we hadn't. And our stomach is so full, we got to unzip our pants and we have all of this regret, right? Sound familiar? Okay. And so what we got to do is we got to be able to tie this standard template that we just talked about so we have something that is custom for you. Does that make sense, Tina? Awesome. So if you look at your student action notes, you will see that on the action notes, there's the standard template on the left side. And then on the right side, we're going to go ahead and start creating some custom cues of what is going to be relevant for you. So that way you have your own custom hunger and fullness scale. And so right here, I'm going to break frame so I can talk to you guys as RWA students, is that what you're going to be doing here as RWA coaches or RWPs, what you're going to do here is you're going to take what it is that the student told you earlier from the new information section about some of the cues that they notice, and you're going to go ahead and work with the student to go ahead and start creating a template here of what is custom to them, right? What do they notice in their own internal cues, right? What do they notice in their external cues? Maybe around 12 p.m. they start to feel a certain way, they start to feel this way, XYZ way, right? And so you can go ahead and start working with them together inside of this experience exercise. And remember, you can collapse, condense, expand this entire section however much you need in order to really help facilitate that process so the student has something to work off of. And the reason why this is going to be important is because for the actual activity for this coaching call, which is going to be the hunger and fullness activity, in the action steps, they are going to be going ahead and utilizing this in the upcoming week. And so you're kind of jump starting and kick starting that process. And then over the upcoming week in the action steps, they can start to customize this further and further and further until they have a really good relationship and they have a really good intuitive sense of their own hunger and fullness scale. And then from there, once we've gone ahead and walked them through this entire kind of experience exercise here, we go ahead and walk them through a couple new habits, right? And we go ahead and walk them through a couple new habits that are potentially going to be helpful for them to install inside of their version 2.0 identity. So that way they can become the kind of person who effortlessly does this. Remember, we're going ahead and tying this back to the becoming process because the student might say, hey, I have a hard time remembering to do this. I have a hard time making this into a habit. Well, guess what? If you actually tie it into your identity, hey, I am just the kind of person who effortlessly does this all the time. I'm somebody who actually does the hunger and fullness scale consistently. Then guess what? It automatically becomes a part of who they are, right? And so therefore you go ahead and walk them through 6 habits that is going to go ahead and help them install this inside of their new identity. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and read through this word for word. That is going to be up to you to make sure that you go through the script and make sure that you are prepared for this, okay? So you go ahead and kind of walk them through that. And then as we work on helping you become your version 2.0 2.0 identity that has the health that you want, right? We can start to add these habits in there as the new version of Tina who has these habits, okay? So what are your thoughts on these? Is this making sense, Tina? Yes, this is making sense, okay? Now, I do want to go ahead and make a note because this is the end of the experience exercise that, hey, this coaching call felt a little bit short. Now, remember, even if you felt that this coaching call, this practice coaching call was a little bit light on the value, remember, there are so many other exercises from the bank as well as a bunch of different exercises that you yourself in your career as you are coaching students, as you're walking students through transformation exercises that you are going to be able to create using a lot of the previous trainings that you have inside of your certification, right? So exercises like nutrition when planning, nutrition where planning, nourishment menu, all of this is going to depend on what the student is struggling with based off the information that you're learning from their intake form and their conversations, XYZ, right? And so for right now, we're just practicing getting in the reps so that way you can practice delivering this with energy, finding your voice. And then when you actually are starting to design your program and the curriculum, that's where we can actually go ahead and tweak this in the future. Okay, so that is going to be the experience exercise for practice coaching call number 8. We then go ahead and get into the action steps. Again, like I said earlier, the action steps are going to be the 6-day hunger and fullness scale activity. You are going to find that in the resources section below. If you do need a refresher on that, make sure you go ahead and watch through the training that we talked about that earlier in this certification process. And so here in the action steps, you are going to go ahead and share your screen and walk the student through that 6-day activity. So that way they are familiar with that. And so you can go ahead and connect that to the becoming process again. And so whenever the student is really going ahead and doing something new, right, you're going to sense there's that self-sabotage element that happens because they start to get overwhelmed. They start to say, hey, I don't know if I can do this. There's a lot of new stuff that I'm doing. You just go ahead and remind them again, because even though they know it theoretically, even though they might know it in the back of their head, it's very difficult when you have a new concept to always bring it to the front part of your mind, right? And so you want to go ahead and remind them, because this is a quote that I really love, is that we as human beings need to be reminded more than we need to be taught. And so whenever they kind of get overwhelmed, whenever they feel like, hey, I got to make all these changes, you just got to remind them, hey, because remember, this is your version 1.0 self is the one that created the version of you today. And so in this new season of life that you're going into, this new version of yourself is going to be doing things differently, right? Because if we always do what we've always done, we'll always get what we've always gotten. And so you got to become the person who doesn't find this overwhelming. And you're going to do that through repetition. And so we're doing the work in order to become the person who can effortlessly and naturally do this without even having to think about it, right? And so when we focus on becoming that kind of person, what we're finding is that naturally they're doing is that this kind of person actually eats until they're at a level 8 and they don't wait until they're actually hangry, right? This is the type of person that I'm becoming who does this effortlessly. Does that make sense, Tina? Yes, that makes sense. Okay, awesome. And then from there, action step number 2, you go ahead and continue to build on what was covered. Again, like I mentioned in a previous practice coaching call, action steps are a phenomenal place to go ahead and add things in coaching calls that we're really going ahead and adding things like dietary changes, movement, sleep, right? Those kinds of things are awesome that they might not need their own specific coaching call for, but you can go ahead and add them on there, and especially helping them build on what was already covered, right? So if they already told you that, hey, I'm working on going hiking more, I'm going to yoga class more, I'm working on, eating these portion meals, I'm working on going to bed at this certain time, you can go ahead and help them build on that. And then of course, action step number 3 is optional if you wanted to go ahead and include that, but you can go ahead and include something that might be relevant and empowering for your student as well. Okay. So after that, from the action steps, you go ahead and repeat them back to us, and you go ahead and have them take ownership of the action steps. So that way they go ahead and have all of those written down, and that way they can make sure that they are actually executing on them over the next week. Of course, from there, if you do feel that you suspect that the student may not follow through, there is that little bit of a script there that you can go ahead and use and then coach the student through on setting up the conditions for inevitable success as well. I'm going to go ahead and make a note here. If you are a partner with an RWA student and you have not yet taken this frame, if you have not yet taken this role, kind of role playing back and forth and saying, hey, you know what, I do suspect that my student is going to struggle. Hey, go ahead and throw it in there, right? Go ahead and practice that so that we can actually get practice on this specific part as well. Okay. From there, we go ahead and hop into the next part, which is part number 6, which is ahas, appreciation, and takeaways. You go ahead and ask the student about that, so that way they can really instill the value and cement that for yourself as well as for the student. And then of course, closing out the coaching call, you want to make sure that you do have a specific time and date for that, so that way the student has that open loop. That way they can make sure that they are showing up for the next call as well. And so with that, that is the end of the explanation part of coaching call number 8. Of course, we do always talk about ditching the script. Make sure that you do not expect to be spoon-fed. All of this is really here to help you find your voice, so that way you can go ahead and get the practice and the repetition in. I would urge you, I said that in one of the previous coaching call trainings as well, really start urging you to go ahead and start putting in that energy, go ahead and putting in that kind of pauses, go ahead and start playing around with your different speaking styles. If you stick to what it is that you've always done, right? If you got, this applies to yourself as well. If you stick to the way that you've always spoken, you're not going to be able to find your voice, because you've always spoken the way that you've spoken and you hadn't found your coaching style and your coaching voice that way. And so I would urge you to be able to change your tonality, change the pauses in between the words, add energy to this, really practice on maybe smiling a little bit more, right? Really focus on making changes as you're starting to get used to kind of the setup, as you're starting to get used to kind of the parts of all of this. Make sure that you are making those changes, because it's through that experimentation in the way that you speak. Maybe you enunciate words a little bit differently. Maybe you decide to speak a little bit more clearly. All of this, I would urge you to really go into these practice coaching calls with that game plan, so that way you can actually experiment with finding your own voice. Do not expect to be spoon-fed. This is all going to come down to your own resourcefulness, your own creativity, really being able to put in your own work, so that way you can ultimately make this your own and ultimately be successful with this. Because remember, education is not the learning of facts. It's not about, hey, being a remote control student and literally doing exactly what is inside of the program without thinking. You're going to take what is exactly inside of the program. Yes, you are going to be replicating before you are iterating. Yes, all of that is valid, but you are going to need to make sure that you are understanding of it. You are thinking through it. You're understanding the principles behind it, because that is ultimately what is going to allow you to be successful with this, okay? And then of course, from there, we talk about the pillars of your transformation product. And right now we are focusing on the training piece of this. And then we will talk more about the synergy, and then also the 4 cardinal rules of the minimum viable product, okay? With that being said, let's go ahead and talk about coaching call practice 8. Of course, at this point, you really understand how all of this works. Skill equals knowledge times reps. You got to make sure that you are putting in the reps. You are going to be working with the same partner that you did from the previous coaching call, because this is coaching call number 8. Of course, at this point, you understand why the practice coaching calls are very important. You're probably starting to see some of the benefits from these practice coaching calls as well. Let's go ahead and talk about the instructions for this. Make sure that you do go ahead and get everything set up properly, as you probably already have at this stage. Make sure that you do go ahead and communicate with your partner, so that way you do get the time set up. Make sure you go ahead and make it as real as possible. Go ahead and have that role play in place, so that way you guys can both have that proper practice in place as well. Make sure you are going ahead and reading the script out loud, so that way you are prepared for your partner, so that way you're not wasting their time. Make sure you are respectful of their time as well as you go through this entire process. And then of course, make sure you are able to go ahead and prioritize these, so that way you're not having to do one a week. You can actually do 2 or 3 practice calls a week, so that way you can get through this module in a proper time frame, okay? Now, I know I do say this every single time, but I really do mean it. I know you're going to do great. Make sure that you are focusing on the process. Make sure you're not beating yourself up, because remember, practice makes progress, and that's all we're aiming for. Because at the end of the day, if you come and say, hey, I still don't have the skill of finding my voice, and I ask you, hey, how many reps have you done? And you're like, oh, I only done, 2 reps. I've only done 5 reps. I've only done 10 reps. I've only done 12 reps. Well, guess what? You might end up having to do dozens and dozens and dozens of reps in order for you to be able to find your voice, right? Everybody's different in this. It takes some people longer than others, but it's through this practice, it's through this repetition, it's through this experience that you are going to be able to find your voice and have this skill set for the rest of your life, okay? Now, in order to close out this training, we are going to be adding that student community engagement question again. Go ahead and let us know, hey, how has this entire process been for you, right? Maybe you want to go ahead and skip these questions entirely, and maybe you want to let us know, hey, these practice coaching calls that I've been doing inside of this module, this has been awesome. Hey, Coach Yasin and RWA team, hey, everybody at RWA, I really enjoy how you guys have set up this module. Go ahead and give us that feedback, right? Hey, I really enjoyed this. I really would have preferred this instead. Hey, this has been really awesome. I really got this away from all the practice coaching calls that I'm doing. Give us an overview, right? Maybe not specific to this specific coaching call. Even feel free to go ahead and let us know your thoughts in terms of how module 5 as a whole has been going for you as well, because we really, really value your feedback. And I know right now, so far in all of the modules and all of the trainings, right, we've kind of been going through coaching call number 1, coaching call number 2, coaching call number 3. You're kind of commenting your availability and your takeaways from the practice calls, but we'd love to get your feedback on how module 5 as a whole has been for you and really kind of getting that nuanced detail so that we can learn from your experience so far. And so that is going to be the student engagement question for coaching call number 8 in this specific training. Of course, let's go ahead and talk about your action steps. We talk about watching and studying this training in full. Make sure you go ahead and complete the engagement question for this training that we just went ahead and talked about. Make sure you go ahead and save all of the files and the resources. Yes, there's quite a lot. Make sure you go ahead and save all of those files and resources inside of your Google Drive. Like I said, we have gone ahead and started including the slides for you as well, so that way you don't have to go out there and start creating those slides. We are going to go ahead and start putting those slides for all of the previous coaching calls as well. Make sure you prepare your student action notes. Make sure you go ahead and practice. If you have any questions, let us know. Conduct your practice call with your partner, upload your practice call to YouTube, and then go ahead and comment your recording and your takeaways. Okay, so this has been practice coaching call number 8, all about the hunger and fullness scale. I am super excited to go ahead and see your thoughts inside of the student community as well as your practice coaching call recording. This is Coach Yasin checking out, and I will catch you inside of the next training.